but it's just too big of a story to tell in a short lecture. So I picked a few people that I think are important and who can briefly tell you about the heist. Now again, it's made up of 32 individuals who were involved either directly or through rumor and gossip. It could even be slight whispers you make the canvas if you were interested enough. And now the Isabella Stewart Gardner robbery, in which $500 million of art was stolen, occurred in 1990. On March 18, 1990, two Irish-American thugs rapped on this door. That's the Palace Road entrance to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and they said they were there to investigate a disturbance from inside. Now, one of the two incompetent guards that were on duty buzzed them in against museum policy. They weren't allowed to buzz people in unless they had confirmation. And one confirming phone call to the BPD, hey, you got a cop at my door, and they could have averted the largest art heist in America's history, in which again, $500 million was stolen. They get inside, swiftly drag the guards down to the basement, handcuff them to the pipes and gag them, and they spent over 80 minutes on an art masterpiece shopping spree, in which they stole Vermeer's The Concert, which is worth about $200 million itself, 3 Rembrandts, this amazing seascape, Storm in the Sea of Galilee, which is his only seascape, this small self-portrait, Lady and the Gentleman in Black, Che Tortoni, my name is Che Tortoni. This is Govar Flink's landscape with an obelisk, and this was once attributed to Rembrandt, then reattributed to Flink. Maybe the thieves thought it was still a Rembrandt. They stole some Degas drawings, this amazing Chinese Shang Dynasty coup, which I just love. It really intrigues me. And also missing from the crime scene was this eagle head from the top of a Napoleonic flag. They tried to steal the flag, and they took a bunch of screws out. It was behind a glass case, and they got frustrated. Interesting to notice that these guys were in the same room with a Michelangelo drawing, and very rare in America, and they passed a Michelangelo drawing for that golden. It's not even golden; it's a golden color eagle. Okay. Now this is an artist talk, not a law enforcement lecture. But I know many are expecting something new. And through my visual investigations, I have come to the conclusion, it's my belief, that it was armored car robbers that pulled off this heist. Now, I'm not talking about David Turner and George Weisfelder, who worked for Carmelo Merlino, as we were talking about upstairs. That was as described in Howard Bose's book. Although these guys certainly would have known Merlino and dealt with him, there were 2 major Irish gangs in Boston in the 1970s, the Carleen Gang and the Mullins Gang. Whitey Bulger, the famous Whitey Bulger, who here's talking to the dirty FBI agent John Connolly, he's in for 40 years right now. Whitey Bulger was a Carleen, and there was a real nasty war between those 2 Irish groups in South Boston in the 70s, and a lot of blood was spilled. Long story short, they made a truce, and a guy named Howie Winter became the boss of now they merged, and the Winter Hill Gang with Howard Winter. Bulger eventually became the boss, but there was still a lot of old grudges, and he didn't have the complete loyalty of all those old Mullins. Now I'm telling you here that the robbers that pulled off that heist were the old Mullins gang. They were associates of the old Mullins gang, not of the Colleen gang. Now many here put a lot of weight on the Bulger theory. They placed all their money on the Bulger bet because he was the baddest, scariest bad guy in town. He really distilled fear in the streets of South Boston, because he was ruthless. And he went on the lam for 16 years after this agent tipped him off to federal indictments that were coming his way. The agent got arrested before Bulger. And people thought if Bulger ever got caught, these paintings would come back. He'd either try to plead his way out or bargain, because he was facing some death penalties. So I think he did over 19 homicides they know of. So he was busted 16 years later, 2 years ago. He was 16 years on the lam. They got him last year in Santa Monica, California. And when FBI raided his house, they got a bag full of MAC-10s, and they found 800 grand in the wall. So $800,000 in the wall. And there's no art to be spoken of, because he really, now the law enforcement, all the investigative community, whether they're agents or cops or private detectives, they were always split on this. Bulger yes, Bulger no, Italians, Irish, and that kind of has to do with this painting. This painting is about all the different theories, all the different people putting out, you know. So now back to the canvas. The usual reporting on this paper, that is the articles, the books, the documentaries, the films, the movies, they all have two things in common. That very boring beginning, March 18th, 1990, blah, 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 which I'm getting tired of hearing over 22 years. That's the one thing they have in common. The second thing is that it doesn't have an ending. And what's more boring than a book without an ending? So it's a story with a boring beginning, a story without an ending, and the story's getting old. 22 years old. For 22 years, they've investigated this crime, and they've chased down many leads, nationally and internationally, and they came up with zero. So right now, none of the art has resurfaced. Now, over the years, multiple informants have dropped names and gave info. Investigators have expressed theories, like I said, Italians, Irish, IRA, you know, American mob, and reporters have written many articles about the crime. TV show hosts, documentarians, film producers, all have something to say about this crime with each other. Now, this is Paul Turbo Henry. He runs the Art Hostage blog, arthostage.blogspot.com, and we were discussing this in that fashion. You know, like, they're all a bunch of gossips. And said, yeah, they're all a bunch of gossips. And said, yeah, like Norman Rockwell's painting the gossips. And we laughed, but we conceived that painting upstairs with all these people talking, and they all talk about each other too. If we had some of them in this room, there'd be a fist fight. It would actually be amusing, but he's an interesting fellow. Oh, and we decided on this large canvas and the price, and I told him, you know, it's kind of a big undertaking. I'd like to have a third down. And he got all excited about it, and he paid me in full up front. He's really an interesting, eccentric art collector. But if any of you saw the film Stolen, the protagonist in that film is Harold Smith, the famous art loss adjuster from here in New York, and they met on the beach at his beachfront property. And he really believes in the IRA connection, and that Irish paramilitaries had at least a Vermeer in Dublin. Now, Turbo was, at one point in his criminal career, was a huge stolen art fence. He sat at the height of his career on top of £1 million worth of art and antiques. When his son Oliver was born, he turned a new leaf, and he signed on as an informant with this man. Oops, that's Slab. He's talking to Thomas Slab Murphy on the canvas, because Thomas Slab Murphy was allegedly the chief of staff of the IRA, and he denies that, of course, but Turbo always put a lot of weight on the IRA thing, and so did Dick Ellis. He signed on as an informant with Dick Ellis. The Detective Sergeant Dick Ellis was the founder of Scotland Yard's Art and Antique Crime Unit, and he went on after his retirement to do it in the private sector. And Turbo, in the film Stolen, had this whole scheme how to get back the paintings, and it would have been under Ellis's guidance. He was going to get this man, who is T.D. Martin Ferris, a parliamentarian in Northern Ireland. He is Sinn Féin politician. Before I go on, he's talking to William Bulger, who is Whitey Bulger's brother. He was a politician as well. He was he was president of the state senate in Massachusetts. So you had gangster and politician in the same family. But the scheme was to get Ferris, who had a lot of respect in the Irish community. Ferris was a hardcore Republican activist. He was big in the Republican movement. He got busted in the Valhalla gun-running heist operation, and they were bringing arms from Massachusetts to Ireland. He did 10 years for that. Then he became a community activist upon his release and got into politics. So he's a very respected man in Northern Ireland amongst the Irish, and he was going to deal with Ted Kennedy under their plan, who was very respected amongst the Irish in Boston. And he was very dedicated to getting back the works to the Gardner. And unfortunately, the plan didn't pan out, but that was their plan. That's how Ted Kennedy made my canvas, but a lot of people were asking. Now this is Miles Connor. Now Miles Connor is the media darling of art theft. And the media made him the most notorious art thief in New England and maybe America, with such publications as Time Magazine stating that he's smart enough, he knows so much about art, he can run both Sotheby's and Christie's out of the jail cell. And they did interview him for that article when he was in the joint on some stolen paintings. But they also wrote that he's a member of Mensa because he's got a high IQ. They really built him up, and he's so colorful. You know, he used to be a rock and roll star and played with Sha-Na-Na, or at least opened up for them. He's a real colorful fella. And now this is very important, he stole 300 Wyeth paintings from the Woolworth estate in Maine. He got busted and he got put in prison. While in prison, he planned and orchestrated the theft of a Rembrandt. It was the girl with the gold trim cloak. It was on loan from France. Him and his boys got tipped off that this thing was on loan from France. They kind of thought they would have to bargain to get it back because it was on loan. And so he orchestrated from this jail cell to get this thing stolen. And forget your high-tech, like the James Bond burglars that they busted in Bergen County, the guys that ride from the cops and shoot the oil with the nails down and flatten their tires and all this high-tech. This was a fast guy with a pair of sneakers. A snatch and grab. They drive up, he walks in, he grabs the painting, which wasn't even wired into the wall, and runs out. Now they got the painting. It was that easy. So in jail, orchestrates a painting. Now Marty Leppo, his high-profile attorney in Massachusetts, contacts the authorities and says, Miles can facilitate the return of this Rembrandt. He wants his charges dropped. And what they did was they lowered his charges. You know, he ended up getting less time. Now he has a lengthy criminal record which includes violent crimes, and he's admitted to doing over 20 art heists. His last known art heist was the Mead Museum. He stole some paintings out of the Mead Museum. It was done in '75, but he ended up getting convicted in '90. Now in 1990, he was in prison already when the Gardner went down and some Rembrandts got stolen. Now Miles came into the big time into the Gardner reporting and investigation in 1997 after an antiques dealer he was bringing up since he was 16, teaching him karate and teaching him the ways of the street. His name was William Youngworth III, and William Youngworth was attempting to negotiate the return of these paintings. And Youngworth said he wanted full immunity for all involved parties where no one would get convicted and no one needs to testify. And he also wanted the reward, which was $1 million. Then it went to $5 million. But he also added, I want Miles Connors out of prison. The authorities' hair stood up on the back of their neck because now you got the same guy that once was in prison, orchestrated the theft of a Rembrandt to barter his way out. Now he's in prison again, and some Rembrandts are missing, and here they're saying we want Miles out. So they really were, their ears were open. Now, his criminal career is winding down a little in his old age. When he was 68, in September 2011, he did a crime. It was the Haystacks. But the art newspaper in London, their headline read that he's not stealing Monet's haystacks. See, his longtime girlfriend, they live in Blackstone, Massachusetts, and they have a whole bunch of animals. Dogs, chickens, goats, horses, a lot of big, mean, scary dogs. Big, barking, scary dogs. They cost a lot to feed. A farmer in the area noticed about a couple grand of hay missing from, he sells hay, and he noticed a couple grand missing over a couple weeks. So he alerts the police. They start watching his farm for him. They roll up on Miles throwing a couple $100 worth of hay over the fence to steal. Now, you gotta give him credit for trying, but a 68-year-old isn't gonna get away from those young cops, and he didn't get very far. He claimed that he clearly forgot to pay for the hay. But that's, his last caper was haystacks. Now, both Miles and Youngworth were questioned immediately after the heist. So were many art thieves. Anyone they thought could have been suspect. They were just thrown out the net. But now Miles claims he cased the Gardner back in '74. He said that he got disinterested in and distracted by the Boston Fine Arts because they had a better collection and it was just as easy. Miles claims his friend Bobby Donati was one of the guys who pulled off the job. They did it using his plans, and that they were going to cut him in, supposedly. Donati can't answer to this because he was found not too long after the heist. He was found in a trunk with 19 stab wounds in his neck cut. So he was a mob enforcer, and someone got mad at him. And this again is what this painting upstairs is about, is all these different theories and people talking. William Youngworth, now they hate each other, because Miles claims that Youngworth stole some art and antiques from him. But William Youngworth has a different version of it and how it went down. He claims that he had a lucrative ID racket going, and that their ID equipment, he was making IDs for Joe Mack. Joe McDonald was the hitman up in Boston, a real important hitman up in Boston, and they were making IDs for him. He claims that there was a raid and their ID equipment was stolen. So they had a guard on the inside of the Simmons College that allegedly led them inside. They loaded the truck with all the equipment and handcuffed it to the pipes down in the basement, and the guy claimed it was a robbery, and that's similar to what happened in the Gardner. And again, it's right in the spirit of the painting upstairs, because everyone has a story and you got to sift through all these leads